Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903.
As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Well, happy Thursday, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and today I am so excited to welcome my good friend Jason Rantz, who you see all the time on Tucker Carlson as one of their basically senior reporters now from the Seattle area. And he's, of course, the host of his own radio show that I've been so privileged to be a guest on. And Jason, you broke a story the other day on Tucker that was just wild in how inappropriate these crazy leftist school board leaders are. Tell us about that story, and I want to get into it with you because I have so many questions.
Yeah, so this takes place in Bellingham, Washington. It's near the border with Canada. Jen Mason is a school board director who also happens to own Wink Wink, which bills itself as an inclusive, all-ages sex shop. And that's kind of creepy to begin with, but she's hosting a series of workshops for kids as young as 9 years old called Uncringe Academy, in which she is effectively doing a sex ed workshop. Now, 9 years old seems to be very young, and then when you take a look at some of the topics that she says she's going to cover, it includes sexual anatomy for pleasure and reproduction. She gets into what is sex, including kinds of solo and partnered sexual activities. This is taken directly from her website, and safer sex practices for all kinds of sexual activities. So when we're talking about a 9-year-old, I think most people would reasonably say that's going a little bit too far and is introducing, adult themes at too early of an age.
Absolutely. And this is just the next story of how many leftists who are engaged in school-based either curriculum or leadership or something in the K through 12 area that are so myopically focused on over-sexualizing minors. So the first question is anybody even attending these classes? I mean, I can't imagine a parent going, oh yeah, I'm going to send my kid to the Wink Wink sex shop to get educated on all of these adult-themed topics.
This is the kind of stuff that a lot of woke liberal parents believe in. Now, this is separate from the school district. The school district is not endorsing this event. But when you have a school board director who is constantly hosting these kinds of things, most parents, I think, are going to confuse the two separate issues. And I don't know how much you can truly separate yourself from your school board director role when you're doing things like this. There are a lot of parents who have wanted to speak up. A lot of them contact me. The problem is they are terrified that they're going to get attacked as a result of this, or called, bigots as a result of this, or claiming that you're trying to hold information from these kids. Because remember, one of the topics is also gender identities. And there are some people who want to pretend that this is a story showing that conservatives don't want any of this content being taught. I believe in sex education that is age appropriate. I think there are clearly examples of kids who are, 13, 14, 15 years old who have questions and don't feel comfortable talking to their parents. And they might still need to get this information to them and they might actually have some questions. So if you have a trusted adult who's using age appropriate materials that is completely separate from any sort of political agenda, I don't necessarily see a problem with it. But I think reasonable people can say 9, 10, 11 years, that's too early for this stuff.
Absolutely. And there is also a marked difference between answering teenagers' questions about sex and sex education, maybe as a trusted adult or even a teacher, if that's someone that the child trusts, versus forcing a 9-year old to sit through a class with all of these types of content that are clearly far above just what's the biological difference between a boy and a girl. And it seems like the left is trying to backdoor all of these other very disgusting sorts of just really, really degrading and gross material through this agenda of, well, we want to promote and teach gender identity so that these kids can learn how to use the proper pronouns and some of those things. So it seems like they're taking and actually weaponizing their agenda to cover a broader range of topics that aren't even limited to some of the things that parents rightly might also find objectionable, like the school teaching children about queer theory and CRT and some of these other things.
Yeah, I think you're correct. And because this is a private workshop and she's acting as a private business owner, you have even less control over what your kids might hear. Now, again, in fairness, a parent has to sign their kid up for this. So they are knowing participants in this. And that's kind of where I step back and say, this is a parent who, because they think they're making some sort of political position or social position, they're basically using their kid and they're doing it in a way that I think is just a little bit unfair to them. When this kind of thing is going on in the classroom, at least parents have a little bit more control over whether or not they can pull their kid from the class, talk specifically to the school district and say, hey, show me the curriculum that you're going to put in front of my kids. Now, maybe Jen Mason in this case would be open to doing that. But I think it serves as a bigger point, which is what you're making there, is we are pushing kids down this path too quickly. Look, at the end of this, Jen Mason might be open to explaining what the curriculum is in a way that a school board would, but I think that that's not really the point. The big picture here has everything to do with the fact that you've got parents who are willing to introduce kids at an early age, and you've got in this case, a school board director, again, acting independently, but a school board director basically using this as an opportunity to put a political agenda in front of these kids.
Yeah, and I think even saying that this is unfair to kids is being really gracious. I mean, I would call this child abuse. And I would say that, this taking a child, whether it's even, in the home or an independent place, to say that parents are going to expose children to this type of graphic adult content is absolutely disgusting and immoral and is actually child abuse. And I think can fall within the reasonable legal boundaries of sexual exploitation of a child. Because if we look at the legal definition of this, and I was actually interacting with this reporter and this journalist that remarkably and just, I mean, it was so disgusting to me, Jason, that he actually asked the question on Twitter the other day and asked the question, what is actually the harm, quote unquote, harm to a child to be exposed to a drag queen? And I'm thinking, okay, it's not just this like drag queen story time of like, men dressing up as women, which is questionable in and of itself. But when you're talking about these types of over sexualized behavior, where you have people that are wearing, the women that are wearing strap-ons, or the fake breasts that are exposed, or some of these other very graphic sexualized content, even for parents, if they are exposing or intentionally coercing or allowing or encouraging their child to participate in some of this over sexualized, inappropriate content behavior, that falls within the margins of the legal definition of sexual exploitation of a child. And even if it's a parent that's choosing that, there is still a boundary and a line where the state does step in. And listen, I am an advocate for parental rights and the ability of parents to choose the education for their children, all of those things. But there does become an overlap where the state can step in and say, no, sorry, wink, wink, you can't teach this type of graphic sexualized content to 9-year-olds. And that would seem, I think, to any reasonable, rational parent or individual citizen, an okay boundary that the law should say this type of thing is absolutely inappropriate and it actually crosses the boundary potentially into criminal activity. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, I think it's important as you just separate it out. You're referring in this case to 9-year-olds. Now, is the same standard based upon what the content ends up becoming? Is it damaging to a 16-year-old? Maybe not. Probably not. It kind of depends on what the language actually is and how the content is approached. I generally agree that just in a general sense, a 9-year-old is too early for this kind of stuff. So I do think that there's a little bit of nuance in these conversations based on the age and what the actual content is. There
And there
are
has to
ways
always be
that
nuance.
you and I would say, this is inappropriate, but not illegal, versus, okay, this gets into the legal area and it's also inappropriate. So I out of fairness to Jen Mason, I would want to see the actual content, which he hasn't yet shared.
Yeah, and I mean, and I'm ready just based on the descriptions to say that's totally inappropriate and maybe criminal activity. And because that kind of nuance and those types of lines are exactly what the law has to contemplate every day. I mean, there is activity that the law deems as criminal, and then there's also a line where the law says that may be frowned upon by society, or it may be something that the vast majority of society doesn't participate in, but based on the age of the individuals involved, we don't criminalize that activity. And we would just, in the context of maybe the church, say that that's immoral. And those types of distinctions and those types of nuances, we have to argue and approach every day. So, for people who are saying, like, well, okay, hold on a second, this is just something that you don't like that you're wanting to be criminalized. And so, what about something that the left doesn't like that they want to criminalize and say, well, exposing, for example, your kids to church, that should be criminalized. Well, no. We always, as a society, have to look at actual harm. We do look at age. We look at things like sexual content. It is a fundamental right of parents to direct the faith education of their children. But even in the context of faith, you can't, under the banner of faith, say, oh, well, this is just as a wild hypothetical. You couldn't say that, something like abusing a child sexually, that falls under the grounds of faith. So therefore, the parent can choose that for a child. Well, no, we would say that that is criminal and that is illegal and that is out of bounds. And so when we do look at the age of a child, I think you're absolutely right. And I would agree that, some of this content, when we're talking about engaging these issues and discussing it as adults, or even, older, 16, 17-year-olds about ready to go to college, some of these difficult conversations, that's more age appropriate because we can discuss these types of things. It's not programming a child and saying and putting a moral, affirming this morally to a child, but rather saying, okay, this is the type of behavior that you might encounter. So we need to have a discussion of what is appropriate. And that type of conversation, just like anything else in college, where you're talking about different worldviews, you're talking about socialism versus capitalism, those types of things, that's normal in a college setting. But this type of behavior for an education leader in the state of Washington, and it is independent, and definitely get that, but for her to say, okay, parents, bring your kids and I'm going to program them and teach them how this type of sexual behavior works and encourage them to participate in that, in my view, is way over the line. And any reasonable parent would object to that. And I can't possibly see any reasonable parent saying, what's a good idea is bringing my child there. So, where do we go as a society when this is even a question and it's debatable to say that somehow, people, like you said, are defending this woman, Jen Mason, on social media and actually think this is okay?
A lot of these people are choosing to support this because they think it makes a bigger point, a political point. They're pushing back against the conservative movement to take this out of the classroom. And, certainly there have been conservative movements that I think have gone a little bit too far in this world of trying to take the content away, because I think that there is a value depending on the age and the appropriateness of the actual curriculum. So I think we just make the argument, look, at the end of the day, while they may not realize that they're using their kids in a political way or using them as political props, I certainly believe that they care about their kids. And so we appeal in that way, explaining very specifically why this is going to be harmful to your child if you continue to do this.
Yeah, and appealing to these types of parents and saying, care
It's
about
hard.
your child over the political point. I would hope that a reasonable parent who does love their kids would take that to heart and listen. And so, where do you think this conversation is going in terms of, has there been any sort of outcry from parents, or you said you've been contacted by a lot of them. They don't want to be called all of these names, but it seems like perhaps in this town and in this school district, they're going to be having some other conversations in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing course correction across the country. So people unfortunately, have to be pushed all the way to the edge for them to say, okay, if you push me once more, I'm going to go over the edge. I now have to stand up and speak up, because there's so many people out there who are the silent majority but don't feel like speaking up. Because, and by the way, I get this. They're going to get bullied. They're going to get attacked. They're going to get called all sorts of names depending on where it is that they live. And it does take some guts to stand up and say enough is enough, especially if you're talking about school issues, getting up in front of, a school district and a board of directors and say, what you're doing is wrong. And I'm talking in a more general sense, but we've already started to see that happen. Going
Yeah.
into the midterm elections, do we see that red wave? Because if we do, then that, I think, gives a lot of extra support to the people, whether they're parents or not, who want to step up on any issue, saying, yeah, we need to fix this ship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with the over polarizing of society, and we're seeing how the left is going so extremely far left, and there's not this sort of like the majority is moderate, and you have the extreme right wing and the extreme left wing that are the smaller percentages, with the vast shift of the left to a lot of these issues that are very concerning to parents. A lot of parents are choosing to stand up and saying, no, this is where we draw the line. And I think a lot of parents feel that it's now incumbent upon them, even if they wouldn't have otherwise been driven to go to their school board meetings, they now feel it's a responsibility and a
Yeah.
duty to protect their children, to look for school choice options, to make sure that their voices are heard, and they're protecting their children from this type of, really gross and inappropriate content. So we'll look forward to following that story, Jason. And I want to ask you before I let you go about one other really top story today. Our friend Alex Berenson, for those of you who are on Twitter, is a prolific voice there, spoke out a lot about the vaccine in 2020, was suspended on Twitter, ended up suing Twitter, and was ultimately reinstated. So, this is kind of a big story today, that someone actually went forward with his lawsuit, and it wasn't just kicked out with an initial motion to dismiss, but the judge in this case allowed the lawsuit to proceed, and basically found that as Twitter voluntarily set up its terms and conditions with users related to the content that they post, that they can't then break their own rules and arbitrarily kick off a user. It is a breach of contract. And so if you're following, for anybody out there who hasn't followed this case, hasn't followed Alex Berenson, go follow him on Twitter. You can see more of a bigger fleshing out of what this case is actually about. But I think it's actually really encouraging, Jason, in terms of big tech censorship actually being held accountable, and some of these things that aren't necessarily a First Amendment question in the law, but actually a breach of contract issue. And I think moving forward into that realm of the law is going to be really, hopefully, productive and successful for conservatives that find themselves censored. But also, I think it's just fair that these big tech companies say,
Yeah.
hey, here are the rules. And then they actually have to hold themselves to it too, that we as users can reasonably rely on the standards that we agree to when we create our accounts.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Obviously, if you have set a terms of service that you ask people to abide by, and then you're choosing as a company not to abide by them, then yes, you're opening yourself up to these kinds of contractual disputes. On the other hand, there are free speech elements here, the spirit, at least, of free speech, which is Twitter was created, presumably, it was pitched to us as this place where you can have an open discussion of ideas. Now, was it the wild, wild west where you can do absolutely anything? I don't think anyone held that position going into Twitter or to any of these message boards, with the exception of some of the more fringe ones. So you can't simply say, I don't like that view, even though it's well in line with our terms of service, so I'm just going to kick you off. It
Right.
sends a wrong message. Now, Alex Berenson, I think, is an important part of the conversation. I don't agree with all of his analysis that I read, but I'm glad that he's able to put it out there, because at least it gets me to start thinking about things in a slightly different way. I mean, I work in talk radio. You are doing this because you want to present your opinion to people who maybe disagree and convince them that we're right on certain things. And I don't always get moved, and I don't always move people to take my side, but I think we all grow as individuals when we're constantly challenged. And I'm not going to pretend that Alex Berenson is this purveyor of fake news and pushing all this. Like, that's just not true. He's looking at data and he's giving you his opinion. If you do not like it, don't follow it. If you don't like it, you don't have to read it. That's on you as a consumer.
Yeah, and that's the very essence of the town square, where we can all come, debate ideas, and not have some tech oligarch overlord determining what is true and what is false. And so we need to be able to engage these questions. And there are definitely people that I'm like, you know what, I agree with you, maybe not even 60% of the time, but I'm still going to follow you because I want to know what your opinion is. I want to be able to engage that topic and respond to some of your analysis. And I mean, even you and me, Jason, we probably don't agree on 100% of everything. I'm not sure I know anybody that agrees with me on 100% of everything, and that's fine. But I can choose to follow, read, retweet, or not any of your content. And the same with me. It doesn't mean that, as you said, anyone should be saying, well, this is fake news and it's dangerous, misinformation. And so, on the arbitrary basis of viewpoint discrimination, these platforms kicking off people that they don't prefer, that should be a standard no for the tech platforms, that you can't simply censor someone based on viewpoint discrimination, because everyone, whether you are Hillary Clinton to Donald Trump to everyone in between, which those are probably the two polar opposites, you should be able to have reasonable reliance on the exact same user terms and conditions. The same thing and the same rules should apply to every conservative, every progressive, in the exact same way. It should not be that Twitter is known for silencing conservatives and allowing any sort of progressive viewpoint or analysis to thrive on its platform. That is the essence of the town square that we're trying to protect. And I hope that this case will be an advancement, not just in a First Amendment landscape, as I said, but in more of a contract obligation of this platform. Because people say, oh, well, you don't pay for it. That doesn't matter. Twitter is still benefiting financially from all of its users, from me creating an account, from you creating an account. And we create an account with reasonable reliance that Twitter will hold itself and us to the same terms and conditions and not arbitrarily discriminate against me for my viewpoint and allow someone else's viewpoint that they prefer to go against their terms and conditions. Because when we're even looking at that, there are a lot of leftists and there are a lot of terrorists, frankly, that are on Twitter that are saying a lot of different content, and we think, how is that able to escape Twitter's terms and conditions, and yet, Alex Berenson is booted off? So where do
Yeah,
you
just
think this
or
conversation
just
ultimately is going?
at the end of the day, just be honest about what you want to do. If you want to create a platform that dismisses conservatives, then just say that, because at least you're not making this kind of false promise. But that's not how they built Twitter. So that's what I think. Just basic fairness across the board is what's called for here. At least in this case with Alex Berenson, they seem to be admitting fault without admitting fault.
Right. So where do you think this conversation then is going in, the broader landscape? And if we do have that red wave, do you think that Congress will actually address some of these things like Section 230? I mean, this free speech and online platforms and censorship, I think is a big issue heading into the midterms.
It is, and I think that big tech doesn't realize that there are interests on both sides to do something on Section 230, and it seems like depending on who's in power, these tech companies are basically trying to placate one side, but both sides want to do something. They don't always agree on what they want to do. You can look at Senator Klobuchar, for example, and her interest in this is going to be different than a Rand Paul. But at some point, there's going to be that intersection of where they agree, and whatever it is they agree on is not going to be in the interest of big tech the way that they currently see things. So I do think that they would be wise to err on the side of more speech and less censorship. I think that most people would agree on certain kinds of content that doesn't have a place on Twitter. If you're going to be a huge anti-Semite, a huge bigot of any kind, okay, fine. We could all agree that that's a terms of service that makes sense if you're applying it across the board. But again, if you're going to do it on a viewpoint discrimination basis, there was a quote that was given to me back in 2004 by the president of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, the FIRE. It's a great organization. Imagine the power to censor in the hands of your worst enemy. And right now, the power to censor is in the hands of progressives, and conservatives are pretty ticked off about it. But the reverse could happen. The reverse might actually happen. And of course, progressives would be really upset at that reality, and they should be upset at that reality. So how about let's not go down any of these paths of censorship, because you're just creating a system in which is just untenable in the long run.
Right. Right. And that would require both parties and their base recognizing that neither should have ultimate control or power. And that is the essence of true freedom and liberty, is the ability for everyone to have freedom of speech, for all of us to defend someone else's right to speak things that we even ardently disagree with, and to make sure that neither side is in ultimate control and we all are a nation under rules, not a nation of rulers. And that's truly the conservative position. So I hope that we'll get there as a country. And this is why, this kind of, yeah, exactly. Let's cross our fingers. But, this is why this type of, polar two-party system has become ultimately the threat to democracy, or the danger to true liberty, is when one side or the other gets too much power. All it looks for is to crush their enemies, instead of ultimately preserve and protect the genuine fundamental rights for all, while still promoting good and restraining evil, which gets us back to the very first conversation about, this over sexualizing content, and making sure we can all agree on some fundamentals of morality, of truth, and the difference between conduct we just disagree with, like speech, versus actual criminal activity, actual child abuse, actual harm. So we need to continue to have these conversations. I'm so grateful for you, Jason Rantz. And where can people find you to listen to your radio show and all of the great conversations that you put out in the public square?
Well, I am on live Monday through Friday. You can stream it at ktth.com if you're in Seattle.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Jason Rantz. Really appreciate it. And everyone, remember to subscribe to this show. You can go to thejennaellisshow.com. We are on Rumble, YouTube, until, maybe we're censored again on YouTube. And then also you can stream on any of the audio platforms, and that makes sure that you never, ever miss an episode. So I'm Jenna Ellis, and I will see you on Monday. Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. I also want to talk about another great American who is the sponsor of this podcast, and that, of course, is my good friend Mike Lindell. He has been canceled out of so many box stores for simply standing up for his own political opinion. And disagree or not, or support him or not, it is a fundamental right of every American to be able to voice their opinion, and that absolutely includes politics. That absolutely includes issues that are central to our culture. That includes faith. Mike is such a very sincere Christian, and I am proud to consider him a friend, and he is, of course, a friend of this show. So right now, there is a special on MyPillow.com. Click on the new radio listener specials. Get deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including a great towel set, which is a 6-piece set. It includes 2 bath, 2 hand towels, 2 washcloths, made in the USA, regularly $109.99, now just $39.99, but you have to use the promo code Jenna. That's Jenna. That tells Mike that you listen to this show, you're happy that he is a sponsor of this show, and you will get great discounts, but use the promo code Jenna. That's Jenna, either at mypillow.com or call 1-800-564-8475 and use the promo code Jenna.